Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, back with another tutorial for the New Boston. Now, in this tutorial, we've already looked at, or in the past tutorial, we've already looked at connecting to our database. Now, to make this a lot more efficient so we can include it where we require it, I'm just going to get rid of everything in our index.php file, and I'm going to create a new file. Make sure this is enclosed in PHP tags, and the reason I'm doing this is I'm now going to save it as connect.inc.php. Now, what I can do with this now is whenever I open up a new page, let's say it might be index.php or something else.php, all I can do is up the top I can require connect.inc.php, and this way we've required this file to be to first of all exist, because require will kill the rest of the page if this can't be found. Second of all, connects to our database. So now what we can do is under here we can start doing things to allow us to grab some data from our database. Okay, so let's assume that we've connected to our database properly. Let's come into database and refresh from the last tutorial. Okay, we've got nothing up. So under here let's echo maybe OK out, just so we know that it's working. Let's refresh. Okay, so we've got OK. So the first thing we know is that we've required the file correctly, the file exists. Second of all, we know that we've connected properly because we haven't killed here. So this should always come at the top of your page. So let's go to phpMyAdmin, and inside this A database I'm going to insert some data. So we need a table first. I'm going to call this table food, and number of fields I'm going to say, let's say we need an ID field, we need the name of the food, and I'm going to say the calories and whether it's unhealthy or healthy. So I'm going to have 4 fields. So let's create these fields. We're going to ID is going to be int. We're going to have the index as primary because this is a unique, and AI, which is auto increment, is going to be yes, so we want this auto increment. Next is going to be food, and then we're going to say calories, and then we're going to say, I'm going to call this healthy or unhealthy. I'm going to call it HU. In fact, let's make it a bit easier to say healthy, unhealthy, and this is going to be equal to I'm going to say a varchar length 1. So if the food's healthy, this value is going to equal H. If it's unhealthy, it's going to equal U. The food, I'm going to say varchar of, let's say, 25, and calories is going to stay an int because we're always going to have an integer number for the amount of calories in the food. So let's go along down here, and I'm going to click save. So let's hopefully we're going to return, yep, we've returned table has been created. So let's browse. We can't browse the data, but we can see the structure. We've got ID as a primary key in int, food of a varchar 25, calories in healthy, unhealthy varchar 1. So we're storing either an H or a U for this. Okay, so let's go and insert a row of data. I'm going to put the food, remember the ID can be blank because that's automatically going to equal 1. The food, I'm going to say pizza. The calories, I'm going to say 1,000. And unhealthy or healthy, I'm going to say U for unhealthy. Let's just untick this ignore, and we'll insert another row. Food, let's say salad. Calories, I'm going to say 200, and I'm going to say it's healthy, so I'm going to put an H. So let's click on go. That's inserted them 2 rows. That's successfully done. Now we can click browse and view this data. So we can see that we've got an ID which is unique, we've got the food name, the calorie amount, and healthy or unhealthy. So let's say I want to select all the data and display it. Now to select all data, we need to first perform a query, as we've discussed, that needs to select all the data. So I'm going to create a variable called query, and this is going to be equal to some string text. So I'm going to be using double quotation marks because remember we're using singles inside the query. So this query is going to be select. Now we need to mention the field names. So select, I'm going to say food and calories. So food, calories, separated by a comma, from, oh, with a space, so from, and this table is called food, so we need to mention that, where, in fact we can encase these in here as well. So we're selecting the field food and calories, which is what we're going to display. If we needed to display, for example, the ID as well, we'd choose ID, but we don't. We just want to keep that hidden for now. So food, calories from food, where, and I want to say, in fact, no, don't want to say anything. That's it. We can specify an order by, so we can say order by ID, for example. That's absolutely fine. So order by ID. Now what we need to do is we need to actually perform the query. As far as this goes, we haven't actually executed the query within the database. If we refresh our page, you can see that nothing's happening. We're not actually executing the query. So query, I'm going to say run equals, now we're using this MySQL query function to actually run the query. So you can either use the MySQL query function on its own and insert your structured query language in there, or what you can do is just then pop that inside of it. So we're popping this query in here, and then this is running the query. Okay. What we can also do is we can use this or die, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, sorry, I've just deleted that, I didn't mean to comment that out. I'm going to say if query run equals MySQL query, then run this block. The reason I'm doing this is because if the query is successful, this will evaluate to true, and then we can continue with our code. But I'm going to say otherwise query failed. Okay, so echo query success. Now what we're not doing is we're not displaying the result of this query just yet. We're just performing the query. We can use some functions later on to display the results, but for now what we're doing is we're just saying query success if this query makes sense and returns something and is structured properly. Otherwise we're saying query failed. So if the query is a load of rubbish and doesn't make sense, even if it does return, well, it wouldn't return because it would fail, but query success doesn't necessarily mean it's returned any rows. It just means that it's structured properly and it's run correctly. So let's just test this first of all. You'll see that we've got query failed. Okay, so let's see what could be wrong. Okay, I've included this extra comma here, which I didn't mean to. So now let's refresh. Query success. But now you can obviously see if we do something like an extra comma, or say we don't include an extra little apostrophe on there, we'll return a query failed. So you'll know now if your query has worked or not. What you can also do is if the query has failed, you can return the specific error. So what we can do is echo MySQL error, and that is of query run. So what we can do is we can refresh, and this is a success. However, if we do something like add an extra comma in and we refresh, we get this MySQL, oh no, not valid. Okay, yeah, sorry. There we go. So you don't need to supply an argument in here, it's just MySQL error. And what this will do is this will pick up the error from the last query run. So else echo MySQL error. Now let's read this. You have an error in your SQL syntax. Check the manual that corresponds to your MySQL server version for the right syntax to use near from food, order by ID. So that's the rest of it. So what we can determine is just before from food, we've got this comma. So we can delete that, we can refresh, and our query's worked. So now that our query's worked, we need to grab the data of our query and display it. So the best way to do this would be to use a loop. because we have multiple rows to return. If you look, we've got pizza and salad. Query is just going to return, if you were to just echo out the values, it's just going to return one of the rows. But what we want to do is we want to return all of the rows. So we do this using a while loop. And inside our condition for the while loop, we need to reassign we need to assign a variable, and we need to create an associative array from our results. Now remember, an associative array contains a key, which is in a textual form, and a value. In this case, an associative array returned from this, the keys will be ID, food, calories, and healthy and unhealthy. Or in the case of our query, we're just selecting food and calories, so our associative array will contain the key, food and calories, and the value will be each one of these. So, well, it'll be this one first, then this one. So we can then return them in a loop. So what I want to do is I want to say while row equals MySQL fetch, it's said assoc, I guess, but this is actually short for associative. So MySQL fetch associative, and we reference the query that's been run. So we've executed our query here. Here what we're doing is grabbing an associative array of our data and assigning it to the array that's named row. Okay, we'll even call this query row. So query row is now an array because we've grabbed our data from our query as an associative array and put it into this variable. Okay, so now let's see what happens when we run the code, and it will be nothing. So nothing's happened, so we haven't failed, but we've created this while loop in which we can echo out the data from each row. Now how do we do this? Usually for best practice I reassign the variables. So what I do is I say food equals, and we need to now take an element of the array, so we need to say query row food, and I'll do the calories and then I'll explain this. Okay, so we've got a variable now called food, and we've got a variable called calories, and they're both equal to the reference of this array. Remember, we're using square brackets, and because it's an associative array, we're taking the value from the field name food and the field name calories. So this food here and this calories here correspond to this and that. The first time round this loop, food is going to equal pizza, and calories is going to equal 1000. The second time round this loop, remember because we're using a while loop, food is going to be equal to salad, and then calories is going to be equal to 200. So all we do now, let's run it first to make sure we don't have any errors. Always good to check as we go along. Nope, no errors returned. So let's say echo food, a break. In fact, no, we can say food has calories. So we're just basically concatenating on text between our variables. So, and then we can break down. So the first time around the loop, we're going to say food has calories. So this will be pizza has 1000 calories. The second time around the loop, we say salad has 200 calories. So let's just test it out and see if everything's working. Okay, so now for the first time that you can see that the query has returned the data. We're looping through each of the rows that have been returned by our query, and we're echoing out the results. So now essentially what we've done is taken data from our database via PHP. Now what we can do is change our query around slightly so we can retrieve different information. So for example, at the moment this is pizza first, then salad. Now what happens if I want to order it by ID, as we've already seen? I want salad to come first, then pizza. I want the last added row to come first. So that's simple. We just modify our query up here. Order by ID descending. So we're ordering in descending value. Let's come back to our PHP page and refresh, and you can see, oh no, we've got an error. So okay, order by, oh yeah, sorry, okay, I've duplicated this. We've ordered by ID, but we want to order now by descending. So order by ID descending. Let's refresh, and you can see that salad has now come first. The same as if we were to say ascending, but obviously you can see that this is automatically ascending by default. So now what happens if we want to select only a certain food type? So let's say we are producing a list of healthy food. Let's just go in and add some more records so we can get a better idea of what's happening. So healthy food might be pasta, for example. So we could say pasta, calories might say 600. We might say this is healthy, so we'll give this a value of H. And down here we can say another unhealthy food. We'll say ice cream. Calories, let's just give it, say 700, and we'll say this is unhealthy. We'll denote that with a U. So let's click go, and we'll just double check that everything is there. Now we've automatically put these values in, so when we come back to our PHP page, this will automatically update. So I've refreshed, and that's been updated, and you can see that it's still in descending order. We've got ice cream, pasta, salad, and pizza. So now what I want to do is I want to modify my query to work with only healthy food. So I'm going to say select food calories from food where, so before this order ID, where healthy underscore unhealthy, which is our column name, remember, let's just go back and have a look at that, where healthy unhealthy, and we need to say is equal to H. So equals H. Remember, this time using single quotation marks rather than apostrophes. So now let's refresh our page, and you can see that that's been updated with just the healthy food. And then the same again with unhealthy. We could choose U, and then we could list just the unhealthy food. So you can see that just by selecting data from our database, we're choosing exactly the data we want to select. Remember, you can also use things like the AND keyword as well, and you can pretty much change this query to however you need to select your data and how you need to apply conditions to it. Now there's also a function in PHP that allows you to return an integer with the amount of rows that have been returned. So for example, if we return no values, so we've got healthy unhealthy equals U, I could say, and let's just pick something out, healthy unhealthy equals U, and calories equal 100. So what we're doing now in our query is we're selecting where the food is unhealthy and the calories are equal to 100. Now if you look in our table, let's look at the unhealthy. So we've got unhealthy pizza, which is 1000. We've got unhealthy ice cream, which is 700. No record exists where the value is U for unhealthy and the calories match 100. So what's going to happen is when we refresh our page, we've returned nothing. So what happens if we want to display a message to the user saying nothing's been found, so no results have been returned from this query that's been run here? So what we do is we use the MySQL num rows function. So if query run equals MySQL query, now inside what we can do is say, just above the while loop, and then we'll close that just before that, we can say if MySQL underscore num underscore rows, we need to reference the query run, so the query that has actually been run, equals 0 or null, then say something Otherwise, we can loop through the data. There's no point, I'm just going to increment that, or indent that, sorry. There's no actual point in running this while loop here if the data returned here is equal to 0. So we can put an error message in here saying no results found. Okay, and let's I'll make this a little larger so we can understand what's going on. So we've run the query. Now we're running an if statement, and we're saying if the number of rows returned from this query are equal to 0, say no results found. Otherwise, we're looping through the data that has been found, because if it doesn't equal 0, we must have at least one row. Then we loop through and grab the data. So let's just refresh our page and see what happens. So you can see no results found. Now what happens if we change our query around? Let's just go up to our query, and I say and calories equals 700. Now let's go back to our database. We can see that an unhealthy food with a calorie amount of 700 is ice cream. So therefore this query will have returned one row. Therefore this if statement will evaluate to false and will run this block here. So let's just test that. We should just get ice cream displayed on our page. And we have, so ice cream has 700 calories. So using these few simple functions and using a while loop, you can see that we can select all rows in our database that have been returned with a specific query. Now we don't always need to use this while loop to return specific information. For example, if we know that we're only going to return one row, for example the example I've already used with the username and password, if we say return one row and we know we're only ever going to return one row, we can do this slightly differently. And that will be demonstrated in the next video in this series. So for now, that was selecting data from our database using a loop and these small but very useful functions. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, back with another video for the new Boston. Now we've already looked at selecting data from our database, and we did this using the code here. If you haven't already looked at the previous tutorial that explains this code and you're not comfortable looking at this code and understanding what it does, I suggest you go back and view that tutorial, as well as if you haven't looked at the general tutorial on queries and using MySQL, then I recommend you view them as well. Now what we've done here is we've selected a specific field names from this table called food, where unhealthy equals U and calories equals 700. So we've been quite specific, and in this case we've only retrieved one value. That's the ice cream value here with the ID of 4. Now what we want to do is be able to take user input in order to return specific values. So let's say I want the user to be able to specify if they want a list of unhealthy food or healthy food, or maybe if they want to specify a maximum or minimum calorie amount. But for now we're just going to go for the unhealthy healthy food option, and then the rest of that will be self-explanatory for your own purposes. So we're going to keep the code we've already got here. Let's just tidy this up a bit so it's a bit more combined. In fact, we'll separate it just so it's easier to view. Okay, so what we now want to do is take user input. So we want to come down here, or in fact up to the top we could do. Let's just cut off this require here and reopen a tag there for the rest of the PHP, and we can put our HTML in here. Now I'm going to create a form, and that's going to have action of the page that we're on at the moment, and the method is going to be get, just so we can see what's going on in the URL bar at the top, because eventually what we're going to be aiming for is something like we're on the index.php. We want to aim for something like UH equals U for unhealthy or H for healthy. So we're using this get variable here to specify a value. So what we want to do is we want to create a field, and I'm going to say I'm going to create a select field, and this is going to be called UH, and inside we're going to have our options. So we need option, we're going to have a first option, and we're going to have a second option. And these options are unhealthy or healthy, if I can spell it correctly. So option value equals, we'll just say U, and option value equals H. So now let's create a submit button. We'll go down a couple of lines and say input type equals submit. And the value of that can just be submit, so that's what's being displayed to the user. And we'll add something that's a bit more user friendly, so choose a food type, I guess. That would be fine. Okay, so let's first of all, okay, we'll leave that for now. So let's press F5, choose a food type, unhealthy or healthy. Now ignore this for now because in the PHP code we've got a static a static query which we've predefined, so ignore this for now, but eventually what our form will do is it will produce a list of foods depending on what the user selects here. So now what we're doing is, as well as creating our query, we're allowing the user to specify things that they want to return. So this is really useful in sort of everyday applications. So I'm going to click on unhealthy and click submit, and you can see that up here we've got UH equals U. And here we can say healthy, click submit, UH equals H. So we're processing get data through to the URL, and then we can process that in our query. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing we need to do is inside our PHP here, we need to check if these values have been submitted. So I'm going to say if is set $_get UH, then proceed with all of this code here, and then what we can do is indent everything we've already got inside just so it looks a lot nicer. So indent that. So if is set get UH and not empty $_get UH. Now what we can do is we can say UH equals $_get UH. Now let's kill the script there and echo this out, so we know we're basically testing for this being submitted. So we'll refresh the page back to index.php. Okay, so we've got nothing there now because we've killed the page. Choose a food type, unhealthy or healthy. So let's select unhealthy first, and we should be submitted a U here for unhealthy. And now healthy, submit, and we've got an H there. Okay, so now what we can do is we can insert this value that's selected into our query to allow the query to become more dynamic and select the food type, either whether unhealthy or healthy, depending on the user's input. Now, before we start this, there is a problem that we do have here, and we have a potential for SQL injection. And I have a video on SQL injection in this the series for the New Boston. So have a look at that video before you run anything like this on a live web server, because you'll tend to find that queries can be modified using data. So for example, if I was submitting this H value here is eventually going to go into a query. So I could change this to something, it wouldn't be select star, but just for an example, I could change that so we can input different things into our query. If that doesn't make sense now, it will do in a moment. So input equals H. That's a good point actually. Let's also make this str, oh no, it'd be this str to lower, so we're always converting this to lowercase in case people try to modify the URL and everything like that. So what we want to do is, in fact, SQL might not be an issue in this case, because what we might want to do is we might want to check whether this UH either equals U or equals H before we perform this query. So we've grabbed the value UH. What we can do now here is above the query we can check if UH, the variable, is equal to either a small u, which it'll automatically be small because of the str to lower, or will it be an h. So we can say if UH is equal to a u, or UH is equal to an h, then we can run all of this code here, so down to there. And now let's indent everything again so we can view it properly. So if the submitted variable, which is here, is equal to a u or an h, perform the query. Let's just test by putting in else must be u or h. So let's refresh to here. So if we would select healthy, right, okay. Oh, right, okay, yeah. So we're performing this static, so that basically means that it's worked. We're not selecting this data just yet because we haven't input it into the query, but just imagine that this is confirmation, just to say yes, that it's worked. If we click healthy again, we still receive this message. However, if we were to modify this up here to say A must be U or H, or in fact something that might be classed as some kind of an SQL injection, we are supplying this error message. But what we can do for now is take out this error message because we don't really want to give away too much how our program works. So let's go back up, and now we need to do something about this query, because at the moment it's selecting this ice cream row, and this is useless because we're allowing the user to input a value, but we're selecting a query based on our static preset conditions here. So now what we want to say is we're going to get rid of this and calories here. We want to say where healthy, unhealthy equals a certain value. So this value is going to be UH, because remember the user is submitting here a value which is put into UH. We're making sure it equals U or H, then we're performing a query, but this time instead of putting U or H in ourselves, we're supplying the value of this variable. So now if the user was to click on healthy, the value of the of this UH here submitted will be H. It will go back into PHP. We're doing the relevant checks here. We're grabbing the variable here, converting it to lowercase, checking if it's equal to U or H, and then putting it into the query. So not only have we allowed the user to input their own value, we've thought about the structure of our program in the fact we need to check this before it's set. We need to then set it into a variable, then we need to check, then we put it into the query, and follow on by producing a list of all food which is either healthy or unhealthy. So now what we've done is we've created a dynamic query. So let's go back to index.php and see if this works. So we want to choose a food type. We'll choose unhealthy first of all and click submit. You can see that we've now produced a list. Ice cream has 700 calories, pizza has 1000 calories. So they're the two unhealthy values inside our database. So we've got U and U, which is pizza and ice cream. What we can then do is select healthy, click submit. This value up here changes, therefore the query changes, and we've selected the healthy food in our database. So this is how we can combine user input, and it could be text-based input, it can be like drop-down list input, like we've done the select input. It could be absolutely anything. You could even press a button just to grab some values. It's all about combining what knowledge you have of the post and the get variables, and then inserting the data that's been submitted into a query. Now, like I mentioned before, this can be dangerous. We can have something happen called SQL injection, and that's when the value that's put into the database might equal, might come through as another part of a query. For example, if this UH value was equal to let's just go up here, was equal to a semicolon, a single quotation mark, or, and this is this what I'm typing is the value of or nothing equals nothing. Okay, so that's what the user typed into a text area box. That would then be substituted into here, without that extra one, and you can see how just by inputting this data into there, which would not usually be there, so a user types this here into a text box and puts it into here, we've automatically changed the query. Nothing does equal nothing, so this query will always evaluate to true. And this is just an example, however, it can be dangerous. So you need to think about the checks that you do before you perform a query in a program. That's very important. When you're practicing, not so much, but I can I'll warn you now that this is a good practice to get into, making sure that people can't inject their own SQL into your query, hence the name SQL injection. But this has been a quick tutorial, or a longer tutorial, on how to allow user input to create your query more dynamically. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video for the new Boston. Now in this we've already looked at, or within phpMyAdmin, we've already looked at creating things, deleting things, but I'm going to use phpAdmin to just demonstrate some simple SQL queries, just so we understand the basic concept of queries, how they work and how they retrieve values, and also how to structure them, because that's very important. The minute we structure it slightly wrong, we'll be returned an error. We'll have an error in our syntax. So we've got a tab up here that I've just clicked called SQL. Now phpMyAdmin will also automatically put in this little query from you: select star from users where 1, and that's because we were on the browse tab here. By clicking on this, we're doing exactly the same as what we're doing on the browse tab. It will return everything from this table. There's no limits to this at all. It's just select everything, meaning star, from the table users, and where 1 is irrelevant. We can take this out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click go, and you can see that this has showing rows 0 to 1 and 2 total. Query took an amount of seconds, and it's shown our query here with this limit on the end, which I'll explain soon. But we've retrieved exactly the same data as if we were to click browse. So this SQL SQL query for us at the moment is useless inside phpMyAdmin, but when we're working within PHP, we might want to select everything from the database. However, some advice for you is not to use select star, because what you're doing is, when you're selecting data from a database, you rarely will need all of it. I could just say select username, password. For example, if I was logging my user in, I'm not going to need to access their username or password, their first name or last name, to log them in, because this is irrelevant login details. We just need the username and password. So if we were to just say select username and then comma password, now bear in mind these have to exactly match your field names, and as with this here, you can enclose them in either semicolons or this slanted, not a semicolon, sorry, a single quotation mark, or this slanted apostrophe. So we're using an apostrophe here in our username and password. So now let's click go and see what happens. So what we've done is we've returned a query, but this time we've only selected a certain amount of data we want to be retrieved. So we've automatically cut time out of our query. You can see here it says 7 seconds. However, if we were to select everything, oh no, it's quicker. But yeah, okay, so my point there was rendered invalid. But when we're working within PHP, and we're using lots of queries at once, or we're using joins, things like that, which you'll learn later, we want to be selecting as quick as possible. Plus, there's no need to select some amounts of data. So here I'm saying select username, password from users. Now at the moment we've got this where one. Where one's just going to select everything. So where one's true, so it's going to select everything. But what we can do is we can specify where we want to select this data in specifics. Now remember we've got unique username fields, unique ID fields, sorry. And here we've got ID of 1 and 2 for Alex and Billy, and these are unique to this user. So let's say I just wanted to return from ID 1. All I need to do is say where ID equals 1, and we can put that in there as well. So where ID equals 1, so this is going to select the username and password from the users table, which we're in, where the ID is equal to 1. And we're not using a double equals here, we're just using an equals, because there's no assignment of data using this equal sign. So in PHP we use a double equals, but in structured query language we use an equal sign. So let's click go and see what happens. Unknown column 1. Right, okay, so let's go back to edit this. ID equals, okay, no problem. So let's go back to SQL and we'll start again. So we want to select, I'll tell you why that error occurred in a minute, username, password from users where ID equals 1 without our apostrophes. So now we can click go, and our query was successful this time. So you can see what we've done is we've only selected Alex and password. So we've selected the username and password where the ID is equal to 1. And if we look back here, you can see that the ID at 1 matches Alex's data. So it's quite simple to grab the data that you need. Okay, so let's return to SQL. This time what I want to do is I want to perform a query which is going to retrieve the username and or the first name and the surname, but with this time we're going to specify a username and a password. Now if the username and password don't match, we're not going to return this data. However, if the username and password do match, we're going to return this data. So this is essentially a login system. And to do this, we're going to say select first name, last name. Remember, this is the data we want to display when we've selected it. And we don't need to put these in apostrophes, but it's probably good practice too. So first name, last name from users where, and this is where we specify the username and the password. Now if I was to say where username equals or is equal to Alex, and so we're using an operator here, we're saying and password, oh, not in capitals, equals Fred, for example, or password equals P123 or P. So what we're doing here is we're selecting the first name and last name. Like I said, we're going to be returning this data from the users table where username is Alex and password equals P. Now nowhere in this table does the username equal Alex and the password equal P. We've got username equals Alex and password equals password, and username Billy and password equals pass123. So what we're actually doing with this query here is we're returning no rows, and you'll see that when I click go in a moment. Now this has automatically told us that a username and a password combination is invalid, therefore a login cannot be processed. So let's click go. Okay, so we've got unknown column, last name, okay, surname. So this corrected query should now return, oh, username equals Alex, password equals P. Okay, let's try put that in click go. Okay, so my SQL, so I've used apostrophes for this and just single quotation marks for the actual data itself. So MySQL returned an empty result set, i.e. 0 rows. So this query here that we've selected Alex is for the username and P for the password has returned no data. Therefore, the username may exist, but the password might be wrong. So in general, we have a username and password combination error. So now what happens if we run the query with the correct data in? So you can see that my username is Alex here, my password is password. So let's run this and see what happens. Now what it's done is it's returned my first name and my surname because the username and password were both found and they both matched in the same row of data. So this would be classed as a successful login. So hopefully you understand the concept of this and how it could be used in PHP. We're going to move on to some more queries now. Let me just close this window. Let's browse for the data. Let's start from the beginning. So what happens if, let's say, my surname changes, okay? Or let's say my first name changes. It could be anything. So let's assume that this user Alex with the password of password wants to change the name of the first name to Dale, for example. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click SQL. Remember that the ID is 1. Now within PHP you'd have stored this somewhere in a session. If you've already looked at sessions, that like things like login, you'll understand that the ID of the user could be stored in a session, so the current user. So in PHP it's quite easy. Once a user's logged in and we've said, yeah, the user logged in is ID1, we're referencing this user as ID1 because it's a unique field, we can change anything just by referencing back to this ID1. And to do this, we're going to say, we're not going to use select because we're not returning any data, we're just changing. What we want to say is we want to say update users set, and then we choose the data that we want to set to a different value. So set first name equals Dale, where ID equals 1. So let's just go back to this browser, we'll open that in a new tab. So what we're doing here is we're using the update keyword. And by the way, you don't have to do these in capitals, but what happens is if you differentiate things like update and set and where in capitals, you can see that this is the difference between your structured query language and what you're actually dealing with. So it's a lot easier to see. So what we're doing is we're updating users, so this is the users table here. What we're doing is we're setting the first name equal to Dale, so the first name here equal to Dale. If you were to just say first name equals Dale, this would update both surnames because we've not specified what ID or what unique field we want to set it by. So set first name equals Dale where the ID equals 1. So what this is going to do is it's going to select the ID with row 1, it's going to come across and set the first name here to Dale. So let's just click on that, or click on go rather, and you can see that 1 row affected, so it's telling us how many rows have been affected, and in this case 1 row is good because we're assuming that this is the row that we want to update. So now if we come into browse, let's just close that off, you can see that we've successfully updated this first name in the table. So you can start to begin to see why this is useful for when we're dealing with PHP. For example, a user might want to change, say, their password, or they might want to change their first name, surname, email address, even anything to do with that. And we can do that easily within our database. Obviously, we're not going to be working inside PHP-MyAdmin. We're going to be doing everything from PHP, which is a slightly longer process, but it uses exactly the same queries. And as long as we've got this ID stored somewhere in a session or a cookie, then we can, well, probably not in a cookie because that would be unsafe to some extent. But if it was stored somewhere, then we would be able to do this. So now let's look at deleting rows. So let's say I want to delete this row here, this with ID 2, or even ID 1. It doesn't really matter. So let's come into our SQL tab again, and what we need to do is we need to this time use the delete keyword. We need to say delete from, and we need to specify the table, so users. That's very important. Delete from users where, and then all we need to do is specify the column, preferably the unique column. So if we come back to here, where ID equals a certain amount. You could say where username equals Alex or where password equals something, but obviously at the moment we're dealing with sort of a user login type table, so we're going to delete where user ID equals 1. So it's just where ID equals 1. So this is going to delete from users where ID equals 1. So, just to mention beforehand, we can use other comparison operators. We can say things like greater than or equal to, or just is equal to, or just greater than or less than, and things like that. But obviously for now we're just deleting a single row, so where ID equals 1. If we click go, do you really want to? So it's giving us a confirmation message because it knows that we're deleting. We can click OK. It will say 1 row deleted. It will give us our query back. Now what we can do is we can just close this off, click on browse, and you can see that that row has been deleted. So what happens now if we want to reinsert a whole new row of data? We've already looked at inserting the data manually, but from PHP we're going to want to say create a user account. We want to insert the data from scratch basically. So how are we going to do this? We click on insert. Oh no, we don't. We click on SQL because we're doing it manually. So I want to say insert into. So it's pretty much English language. It's easy to follow because you can get it stuck inside your head easy exactly what you're doing. So insert into. Obviously we're specifying the table we want to insert into. So insert into users. Then we use values and we have 2 brackets. Now inside here are the values we insert corresponding to the fields. So let's just browse this. Now this is the shorthand way of doing it, and this is what I'm going to be using. You can do it properly and long and specify each field name as you go along, but I'm just going to be saying insert into users, and then I'm just going to put the values in here. They are in they're going to be in single quotation marks separated by a comma. So at the moment, if we have a look, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different fields. So we need to insert 5 different bits of data. So we've got 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, 4 here, and 5 here. Or the other way around, so it would start at 1, 2, etc. So they're comma separated values. We're using single quotation marks. Now ID can be left blank. We know that because this is auto increment. The next value we insert is going to have an ID of 3 because we're coming from the last value inserted 2. So we need to insert a username, a password, a first name, and a surname. So what we do is we insert, say, Alex, password, Alex, and Garrett. Now if we don't specify, say, the last field here, we're going to be returned with an error. Let's just have a look at that. Column count doesn't match value count at row 1. Now if you are ever trying to insert data from PHP and you are echoing out the sort of like results of your query, if you may have an error and you get this is basically what you need to focus on. You need to make sure that you're inserting the data required. If you don't want to insert a surname, for example, you still need to specify with these inverted commas, or rather single quotation marks. However, you can't leave it out, so you have to insert, it can be blank. So I'm just going to put Garrett in for now. Okay, so that's basically our simple query to insert data. So each of these we've comma separated correspond to our column names, our field names. So we've got ID as the first one, we've got username as the second one, which is Alex, then we've got the password, then we've got the first name and the surname. Okay, so we've inserted them in order where they correspond. So let's click on go. You can see that 1 row is inserted row ID at 3. So now let's go and click on browse and see what we've got. You can see that we've now reinserted the value or the row with Alex, password, Alex, and Garrett, and this is now ID of 3. Now what happens if I delete all of these? Just simply using this delete here, and now what I want to do is insert a new piece of data. So I'm going to go just insert anything. Okay, so we've inserted some data and now you can see that it started at ID 4. Let's say we wanted to go back and we want to start at ID 1 again. Now let's just delete that. You can use this tab called in operations, and if you come down you can see auto increment. We can change this back to 0. If we click on go, we come back to insert and we want to insert a new value. In fact, we'll do this in a query. So we want to insert into users values. So we've got our ID. We've got our ID, our first name, our username, our password, our first name, and our last name. So we've got Alex, say password Alex, and then Garrett. So let's click go. Now what you can see is oh, okay, right, maybe not. So let's go back to operations. Oh, okay, so I set it to 0, it needs to be set to 1, sorry. So click go. Let's come and delete this query I've just put in there, and what that will do is now when we want to reinsert some data, so insert into users values ID, username, password, first name, surname. If you set up this structure first of all, it makes it a lot easier to look at and say just to enter your data. So password Alex and then Garrett. Let's click go. Now you can see that we've inserted it with a row ID. Okay, right, okay. For some reason this doesn't want to go back. That's odd. Perhaps we need to delete before we do this. So let's come into browse and click delete. Operations. Let's come and change this to 1. Click go. Let's just check that's definitely been changed. Back to 1. Yeah, it has. So let's insert that again. We're certainly getting lots of practice inserting using this SQL. So insert into users values. Oh, too many commas. So we've got the username, password again, Alex and Garrett. So let's click go. Okay, so inserted row ID 1. So if you were to delete all the data in your table and you want to start at ID 1 again, then just click on the operations tab and you can do that from there. So these are some of the basic queries, if you like, that we've performed to insert, delete data, modify data. There's plenty more things you can do, things that you can use joins with combinations of tables. If you're struggling with this, then just have a play around with it, creating data, deleting, modifying, just selecting from different places as well. We also have things called ordering, so we can order things and limit things as well. Now let's just insert a few more bits of data. So username Billy, password, and then Billy Garrett. Let's insert some more. Say Dale, password Dale Garrett. Click go. So we've got 3 bits of data in here. So we're just imagining that we've got lots and lots of data for now. We've got ID of 1, 2, and 3. Now, assuming that ID is 1 for Alex and ID is 3 for Dale, Alex will have been created a lot earlier than Dale. We've created Alex first, then Billy, then Dale, because we're using the ID as an ordering system. Now it's probably best to use timestamps in this case. I have a tutorial on timestamps that you should go back and look at if you don't already know. But when you're inserting data, you should probably always use a field with a timestamp in it. And therefore what you can do is you can order your rows depending on when that row was created. So when the row was created, the timestamp you'll be able to order it because it's just an integer, it's just a large integer. But for now I'm going to order using ID. Now what happens if I want to order this, display all users but in order of the last user first? So I want Dale to be first, then Billy, then Alex. Now if you don't know what I mean, I'm just going to show you. If we go to select, say, first name and the have I called it surname or last name? Let's just have a check. Surname. So first name and surname from users. All that's going to do is select everything. So let's just copy and paste that so we can use it later. Let's click go. You can see that what's happened is we've returned Alex, Garrett, Billy, Garrett, Dale, Garrett. Now, like I said, I want to structure this so Dale is at the top, then Billy, then Alex. For example, you may have a page on your website that says like a member list, and you want to structure your member list with the newest member at the top. In this case, this is ordered in descending. We've started from the first user and we're descending down. What if we want it ascending? We want to go from the last one and we want to go up to the top. So what we do is we need to change our query in order to adhere to this. So what we need to do is we need to use this order by, and we want to order it by a specific column, and this column, as we've discussed, is ID. So order by ID. Now it's fair enough ordering by ID, but how are we ordering? Now we can order by ascending or descending, and it's written ASC or DESC. Okay, so yeah, DESC. So I want to order by ascending first of all. I'm going to click go, and you can see that it's ordered it in ascending order. Now if I want to descend from Dale to Alex, all I need to do is make a simple edit to my query, and I want to say order descending in capitals so we can see what we're doing. So I'm now ordering it in descending order. So if we click go, you can see that Dale's at the top, then Billy, then Alex. So like I said, this could be important for something, a list that you want to order in a specific order. You could be ordering by, say, a price, or you could be ordering by a date that a comment was made. So if you had a comment system on your website, you'd be storing comments in a table. You'd assign the date to a field called timestamp, and then you can order by that time. So there's many uses for things like ordering. So now what happens if I only want to show the first two recently registered users, which in this case would be Dale and Billy? I can use this thing called limit, the limit keyword. So order by ID descending space limit and then a number. So limit 3, limit 2, limit 1. If you had lots of records, you could say limit 100. So I'm going to limit by 2. It's as simple as that, limit space 2. Remember your space after you're descending as well. So we don't need any sort of commas or anything in between these. We just need spaces. So now what we're doing is we're selecting the first name and the surname from users. We're ordering by the ID in descending limit, so from the most recently inserted row to the least, or the first, I guess. And then we're limiting by 2. So by clicking this, clicking go, you can see that we're only returning the first 2 rows. So I think that's about all for the most basic queries, things like that we're going to be using on a regular basis. You will pick up more as we go along, especially inside PHP when we need to do things like joins. But for now, that's basic queries, and I've demonstrated this in PHPMyAdmin, which is a really good place to mess around and try things out in an environment where you can visualize things rather than going straight into PHP. So if you visualize this first and have a play around, as soon as you understand it, then we can proceed to doing this but inside PHP.